This is not a new conversation or a new topic. Banning films or heavily censoring things because of people's sensibilities at the time is something that, from my understanding, has been going on since pretty much the beginning of film in some form or another. And even after the film has been released, many decades later, certain films were banned in certain areas. Like, that is a conversation that I've seen and I've heard, and I've even been able to read about just doing research for this video here. But then as that conversation, you dive into it a little bit, just when you really think about it, movies are art and art is subjective. Not everyone's going to like the same movies or get the same thing after watching the film. Like, it's, there's a connection that some people have with films and some people don't. But even in the cinephile aspect, there are films that are hard to find, and the idea to try to find those because they're taboo or banned, or there's something about them that just kind of gets under people's skin, it creates a curiosity. And so to ban or censor these films, which are considered art, to me is the equivalent of walking into a museum and painting over a naked painting or a statue because it offends you. And nobody's doing that. Nobody's asking for that ever to be done. But films forever have had an issue in not just my country, but all countries around the world. And so I have a list of 15 films here that either have been completely banned in certain areas or heavily censored to the point where they've cut them up and chopped it up in such a way that it's not the same. And then there's been several edits of those edits to then kind of give you something that you get the point, but you miss the mark. And so then this one here, this first pile is horror and cult films that are heavily edited or censored. And the first one I have here is Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. Now this one here was banned in Germany from 1975 to 1999. And it had several edits, and after 1999, some of those edits were still banned until 2011, and for the violence specifically. Now, the themes that went on in this film have bothered people for a very long time, and the curiosity for me was growing up hearing that, oh, how horrible it was, and just the stuff that people would talk about this film. It's wild, because when I finally saw it, I was like, that stuff didn't happen. And then I went to do some more research on it, and apparently that was a thing. Like, people that left the theaters and people that talked about this film well after it was put out in the 70s had that same idea, where their brains went a little wild and their imagination got the best of them, and they were saying things that happened that were never recorded, never put in this film at all. And it's just a very wild one to me. So this version on Blu-ray and 4K is widely available, and from what I understand, it's uncut in the way it was intended to be, and you can get this pretty much around the world. Now, number 2 is a movie from 1976. It's To the Daughter of Devil. Now, this is a Hammer film, and what list of banned or controversial films would be complete without a Hammer film? It seems like every single one of them. I know that the Frankenstein one had issue because of its violence and reanimation. I was like, that's the whole point of Frankenstein. But this one here, it was banned. It wasn't really outright banned, but it was heavily censored in many countries, and there's cuts of this film because of the themes that went on. So there's satanic and demonic stuff going on connected to religion and the church. And if you've ever seen the newer movie Immaculate, it's a very similar storyline, and I would honestly argue that that movie was probably inspired by this one, and if not, it's a huge coincidence. Now, this film here was widely panned, and people didn't like it, and it had this controversy, and it was because of those themes of violence and religion, where you had the similar story Immaculate. As far as I understand, that film was critically praised. Like, it got highly recommended. I couldn't hear enough of it to the point where I finally ended up picking it up myself and watching it, and it's very similar. Now, if this movie was made today, the problem with this film I think most people would have would be the underage Natasha Kinski. She was in her teenage years, and she appears nude in the film, and nudity in film is not new, especially, underage at some point. Like, I recall the 70s Superman film when Superman is a baby and he's crawling out of the hole in the beginning of the movie. He's fully nude in that film as well. And so it's just those things get talked about today, but back then nobody cared about. And then vice versa. The religious and the demonic and satanic stuff that's in this film was the huge issue and now today it's not. So this one here, it was a harder film to find, and now you can get this one uncut, and I don't know how many other labels have this one, but this one was put out by Scream Factory. Now this one here is a movie from 1973, and this one came with a ton of controversy where it felt like it was like an urban legend, like this movie just didn't exist because I couldn't find it. And this one here was banned in the UK, I think until 2005, and originally when it came out, it was banned in, it says on the back here, by Swedish censorship. So this one here is something that, while, you know, cinephiles and certain people had claimed that they had cuts of the film, and I guess there was stuff maybe online at one point, but this movie here, Thriller, A Cruel Picture, it's a Christina Lindbergh film, and if there was no IMDb page about this, I would have honestly thought that this was just an urban legend of a movie that just never existed because it was so hard to find. Now, after the ban was lifted, this one here in America, we were, Vinegar Syndrome put this out, but then I think Severin Films also put this one out. So this one, it even says on the back, but it says first they took her speech, then they took her sight, and when they were finished, she used what was left for her own frightening kind of revenge. So it's one of those horrible revenge stories, very similar to I Spit on Your Grave, which is another banned film at some point. But this is something that, you know, it's worth watching. It's kind of a hard watch. Some people can't even stomach it. But for me, it's more important that, like, this was a banned film, and I think owning it is cooler than watching it sometimes. But this is something that, if you're into anything that's controversial, check it out. Now this one here is a film that it came widely recommended. This one came out in the 90s, 1998 I believe this one came out. And we're talking about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I've seen it several times. I own the film. I enjoy it. But to find that it was never really outright banned, but this was heavily censored in many places. Australia and the Middle East were the only ones that heavily censored this one, so there were multiple different cuts of this film, and it was due to its drug use and the hallucination stuff. But now you can own this fully uncut on Blu-ray and 4K, and what an incredible film. Now the next one here is a film from 1996, and it's a film that I love, but it's something that, as I was looking into this is a movie that, you know, I was not really shocked at some point hearing that there were some like copycats of this, and, you know, that did kind of go on at some point, but I saw way worse films, I felt, from the 70s and 80s, and there's films that really should be on this list, like Cannibal Holocaust. Like, a movie like that is incredible, and to the point where, like, people thought it was real. Now, that film really belongs on this list, but this film here, I'm not sure why. So this was heavily edited in the UK and Germany for violence. And we're talking about Scream. So just an interesting thing. Now, I'm not sure if it was like any theatrical release or any of the home video releases, but from everything that I read, in order to get this film over there, they had to do a different cut of it. But currently, you can get this film unedited on Blu-ray and 4K, and from what I understand, all around the world. The next one here falls on a list of controversial dramas and also have like a bit of eroticism to them, and that's usually why that they were banned or critically controversial and heavily edited. But these films at one point either had some kind of issue, but they're all available. This one here is something from 1980, so it's a little bit before my time, but from everything I read, everything I saw, this was marketed to like teenage girls, and that's pretty much who flocked to the theaters to see this. And there's interviews of these girls after they left the theater, how excited they were. And so, you know, just growing up with this film and just kind of seeing it for what it was when I was a young boy and an adolescent, and never really having any issue with it, to hear that it was, you know, extremely controversial, it was confusing to me. So I remember being like 17 or 18, and I was like, I remember growing up with this movie. It seemed to be on TV a lot. And then there's controversy with it. I just never understood it, and it was The Blue Lagoon. Now this one here, it was heavily censored in New Zealand and the UK, and there was different cuts of this. But this one here, not only is it very hard to find, this Blu-ray specifically, now it came from Twilight Time, and I was lucky to get this early on before the prices. Like, this is an out of print movie that goes for a ton of money because it's a cult film that's hard to find, and it's also controversial. And then I think the UK did put out a version of this from Eureka Entertainment, but I'm pretty sure like that's all you can get on Blu-ray. and it's something that'll probably won't be coming to 4K anytime soon. So this is one of the harder ones to find, but it was available, and these versions, from what I understand, are completely uncut. Now the next one is another Brooke Shields film. Now this is one of her first, and this is the one that always comes up. It came up with controversy back then, and I guess everything that I've ever read about this is another one that I grew up watching. It did seem to be on TV a lot, because that's how I saw it back in the day, and I've had it in my collection, for the longest time. I've had it on VHS and DVD in different versions, but then they finally put this out on Blu-ray. But this is a movie that had so much controversy, I honestly thought that we would never ever get a Blu-ray, but we got two. We got one out of Kino Lorber, and we got one out of Australia. Now this one here, out of Australia, so this is from 1978, and this was banned in Canada and Australia briefly, and then there was an edited version for both of those countries, and then I'm not sure exactly what was edited out or whatever, but we're talking about Pretty Baby, and then that was all that was available. Now it's funny because the one version I ended up getting was a Blu-ray from Australia, so from what I understand the ban is lifted. But this is a movie that, one, I think it's a beautiful film, but I saw it at a different time in my life. Like, I was definitely a younger boy. I was probably around Brooke Shields' age, and so, like, the whole idea, the themes that go on in this film, and this is banned for sexuality, but the themes that go on in this film, to me, it was a coming-of-age story. There's plenty of coming-of-age stories that have to do with other people, and there's a lot of times if it's a boy in the situation, they're just called simply coming of age stories, and people like them or they don't like them, and that's fine. But this one created a ton of controversy, and I guess for everything that I've read, from when this was released out over in Europe, everyone praised the film and they loved it, and when it came back here, everyone was mad and everyone was upset about this film, and it just sparked a ton of conversation. And this film has never not had controversy around it. Even when this was re-released, people were talking about this, and all the documentaries started to come up, and then more interviews, and this whole thing came back into conversation. And nothing about the actual. This was based on a true story, I guess. And then the writer was a woman, so that she never ever gets mentioned in this. It's usually the director, Louis Malle, and then Brooke Shields is the only one that ever gets mentioned. But then you never really hear about Susan Sarandon or anything like that. Like all those things get overshadowed by the controversy of this film. But it's uncut. You can have it on Blu-ray in this version and the Australian version. Now, this is one that it had controversy. It was never outright banned, but this is another one. Now, this one, it's one I remember seeing on cable back in, this came out in, I think, 2000. So this was 25 years ago. This one came out, and so this is another one. It was considered a coming-of-age story. I didn't think there was any issue with it. I was able to get this no problem, but then it was actually heavily censored here in the U.S., which is surprising because that's where I saw it. I saw it here in the United States, and I remember seeing it on cable. We're talking about Milena. Now, this is one that, it's just a beautiful shot movie and really enjoyable, from the writer and director of the Academy Award-winning Cinema Paradiso. And now that's one that gets highly recommended to me all the time. I've yet to see that one, but this is just a great film. But it's also one that's not for everybody. It's a period piece, and I really enjoy those. But then you have the idea of this boy in this coming-of-age story. Now, the next one here is from 1997, and it's an interesting thing because it's another one of those things. Like, I don't necessarily say that this one is a coming-of-age story, but it has some of those, like, themes in there, and it's definitely a more wild one. This one, the controversy goes back. It's originally a book, and then there's an older film that had all kinds of controversy. I actually like the older film more than I like this one, but this is the one that was banned outright in Australia upon its release. Now, this movie is another one that it came from Australia. This Blu-ray did, so now it's officially the uncut, uncensored version, from what I understand, is available widely. We're talking about Lolita. Now, this one here, with all of its controversy, again, it's the themes of sex and a young adolescent falling in for an older man. Now, it's not a watch for everybody. It is an uncomfortable watch, but it does create that conversation. But then it goes into the nobody's ever really heard of this film, but everyone has heard of this film and its predecessor and the book, and it's just a constant conversation. It's even made fun of. This entire her name in the book, that entire thing has sparked an entire taboo genre and, you know, conversation, if you even say that. Like, I remember growing up, like, anybody that dressed provocatively, my mother would call them like little Lolitas. Like, it was just a thing that was just kind of part of pop culture, and this movie hardly even talked about. Just an interesting thing. It just seems like there's a, you know, one's okay and one's not. If it's a boy doing a coming of age story, nobody really seems to notice. The next one here is from 1979, and it's a highly controversial film that was banned in many countries, but I was able to purchase this at Best Buy back when they sold movies still. And today when I went to go look for it to see if it was available in other countries, I think Germany was the only other one that put this out on DVD, but then you can buy this today right now at Barnes & Noble. But other than that, it's extremely hard to find and not really widely distributed. And we're talking about David Hamilton's Laura. Now, this is a sequel to another film which I've never seen, but this one here, it was banned due to its nudity and themes of, you know, younger woman with a older man relationship, and it's just it definitely has an artistic vibe, the entire film, and on the cover here, it's why I pulled it in. It was the first erotic film worthy of being called art. Now, that's subjective. It's still an uncomfortable watch. I'm not going to say that. I don't highly recommend any of these films for the most part, save for a few. But this is one that, it's an interesting one, an uncomfortable one, and it sparks a conversation. Now, the next group of films I have here are classic and fantasy films. Now, there's a couple on this list. Some of my favorites I was really surprised that at one point were banned or heavily edited. The first one is The Fearless Vampire Killers. Now, this was, you know, put out several times, but this one here was not outright banned, but it was heavily censored, and a lot of the things I was reading on it was, in certain places, it was censored because it wasn't a traditional take on vampirism. So the vampires that were depicted in here were not your classical, stereotypical, like Bela Lugosi, you know, Victorian style vampire, and there's a comedy element to this film, and so from what I understand, that's why it was edited in many places. Now, there's probably some other scenes in the film that might have just made people feel uncomfortable at the time, but other than that, everything that I understand, it was because it was not a traditional vampire film. So that one here made me chuckle, but you can own it in its uncut version on Blu-ray. Okay, now here's an interesting one, because this is an early film that I have in my collection from the 1920s. Now, this film is from 1922. We're talking about Haxan. This was briefly banned in the U.S. in the 1920s, but then later released. And then this was banned in the UK and many other countries. In the UK specifically till the 1960s, but it was also banned in several other countries. I just couldn't find all the details of when and how long, but it's widely available now. Criterion put this out. There is a UK company, Radiance Films, that also put a version of this out, so it is widely available now, but this was banned for Satanism and nudity and the disturbing images, and it's a silent film, so it's an interesting one. But highly recommend it. And if you're into old black and white silent films or just morbid curiosity, it's a good one to check out. Here's a movie from 1932, and it was banned in the UK for 30 years and didn't come out until the 60s. It was banned in Finland, I think, until the 90s, and it was also banned in Sweden at some point. And this is a movie, and the reason it was banned is its depiction on people with disabilities. So it's just interesting that those places had it banned for so long. It's widely available now, and if this movie came out today, I kind of think it would get banned here in the United States. But we're talking about Freaks. Now, this one here, there is a 2-pack Criterion movie with this one. It includes something else. You can grab this on Blu-ray, but this DVD was also available for many years, and so this is an interesting watch. And again, it's from 1930s. You have black and white. It's not for everybody, but it's an interesting movie, and Criterion put it out, so it's worth giving a watch, I think. But interesting that even back then, it was just fear of being offensive is why it was banned for such a long period of time. Now, these are the two that are my absolute favorite movies. So we have 14 and 15 to knock this off, and then I have a couple bonuses. But this one here is one from 1992, and it wasn't outright banned, but it was heavily edited and censored for its themes of violence and imagery, and probably also its religious connotations. Like, they never really said that specifically, but I feel that that made some people feel uncomfortable as well. And so in many other European countries, this was heavily edited, and from what I understand, it was not just the TV edit that had that. So it was like, that's what comes up initially. But when I did a little bit further digging, it seems like there are other cuts of this film that were out in other countries. And I'm talking about Bram Stoker's Dracula. So this is one from 1992. And again, anything that was pretty much put out in my lifetime, feeling that I saw way worse stuff from the 80s and the 70s, like, I just don't feel that this was one that, it's one of my all-time favorites, and I'm probably biased. It makes my top 5 favorite films of all time. And there's only one scene in particular that makes me feel gut-wrenched, but it's not, you don't see it. It's one of those things where there's like shadows and there's implications and your brain goes a little wild. And so it makes my gut wrench every time. But that's the point, because Dracula is the worst thing ever, and that scene is there for a reason. So it's one of my favorites. But yeah, this is one that now it's heavily available everywhere, uncut on Blu-ray and 4K. But there was a good time where several places had either cut the film or banned the film, and so this was heavily edited in many European countries. So in 1985, Ridley Scott put out Legend. Now this is one of my all-time favorites, and this wasn't really banned at any place, but this was heavily edited, and it was heavily edited for its dark themes and its fantasy elements, and also it was so edited that there's different music scores and different things, and this is one of the only films that I actually enjoy watching all the different versions, because I get something out of it every time, and I've watched it so many times, sometimes they kind of all meld together. Now, this is one that it just kind of surprised me, but then I knew at the same time, I knew there was different cuts of this film, and so like why it kind of took me aback, I don't know. I was like, I just think everybody should like this film. But you have, directed by Ridley Scott, but you have Tim Curry playing Darkness, you have a young Tom Cruise, a young Mia Sara, and for me, this was just peak fantasy cinema and one of my all-time favorites. It's uncut. You can get the different versions. You can get the international version. You get the director's cut. You get you can get this film. It's widely available, and I think distributed all over the world now. Now, the bonuses, we have... I usually don't do bonuses if I don't have the films, but I'm doing these ones. I have one of them, but then I had the other two, I've seen them. So I think that counts because I have seen them. I don't own them, and I don't know if I ever will own them. The first one here is, from the Extreme Films bonus section. It's Salo, or 120 Days in Sodom from 1975. I think anybody that talks about banned or controversial films is going to mention that one. It was banned in the UK until 2000, Australia till 2010, and in New Zealand and several other countries. Graphic violence, sexual violence, and sadistic themes. Now it's available on the Criterion Blu-ray, and so everybody can own it. And yeah, it's one of those ones that I don't know if I need it. I said I might get it eventually, but it's something that I saw it once, and that was good for me. I was like, I don't know if I need to revisit that one. But the other one here is a Serbian film from 2010. Now that one's extremely controversial. It was banned in the UK, Germany, Spain, Australia, Norway, and multiple other countries. It's available here in the United States. But why extreme violence and disturbing themes? It's available limited Blu-ray release, often censored, but some uncut editions do exist throughout the world. I've seen it. I don't like it. I will never watch it again. I do not need to see that film ever again. It's why I don't own it. But it's art at the end of the day. It's one of those conversations. Like, all these films here are art. It's like, I do not get any enjoyment out of that, but I'm not judging if anybody does. There's a conversation to be had with it, and I understand that what is said about the film is it's a take on the country, and it's a take on Serbia's government. Like, I understand that conversation, but at the same time, I watch the film and I don't see it. I just see something that I don't like, and so that's one that's banned. But I was like, I I can see why some countries banned it for its extreme stuff and the conversation, but some of those types of themes have been put in other films, not to that extreme, I don't think, but I was like, correct me if I'm wrong. And then the last bonus is another one that I was able to pick up at Best Buy, but it's hard to get. It's this version of it, this cover actually doesn't even come up on blu-ray.com, but it has the barcode. I did purchase this at Best Buy, but then in America, I think this is extremely hard to find now, but there's a couple other countries that put this out, and so there's versions of this movie. I can't remember exactly where, but I'll put them up on the screen. But this one here, Little Lips. Now this is a movie here. This one, it's a very limited Blu-ray or DVD here, and it didn't have any features, but it automatically is dubbed in English. And this is a foreign film, so it's another one. It has it's a kind of a coming-of-age story, younger girl with an older man relationship. Huge controversy, and it's something that, sexual fantasy, forbidden lust, love conquers, love destroys. And it's one of those things that, again, if it was a boy in the situation, I don't think it would have had all the controversy. But this one here had actual censorship and bans in the UK. They rejected it from the British Board of Film Classification, and it was never officially released in the UK. Australia effectively banned it, and it was never granted a rating. The US never formally banned it, but faced extreme distribution restrictions. So this one was extremely hard to find here. And it's very difficult to find. Some DVDs still exist in Europe, but they are rare and often sourced from them unofficial distributors, not available on major streaming platforms and reputable Blu-ray labels. Like I said, I did purchase this from Best Buy. All right, although some of these might be harder to find, you can own these once banned or heavily censored films in Blu-ray and in 4K, some of them only on DVD. But with that, you're going to want to check out this video right here. Remember to watch a movie today, and I'll catch you guys next time.